Hi, this is Trinity Processor and this is my first foray into video making. I'm saying this in hopes that it serves as a preemptive excuse for my subpar delivery in editing. First of all, unlike what the title and length of the video may suggest, I really do love Xenoblade Chronicles 2, though you might have guessed as much given my name. What I'm saying is that this critical analysis doesn't come from a position of petty-mindedness and unfounded hatred towards the game. Quite the opposite, in fact. It's an expression of my utmost appreciation towards it. I have thought long and hard about the game over the last 5 years. To be honest, I constantly find my mind wandering back to this game. Its characters, its story, its world, its gameplay, and all of the other parts which comprise it, the sum of which manages to transcend the cage of its composition. But that's enough praise. We are here to discuss what it could do differently or straight up better. As previously noted, I haven't stopped ruminating on the topic, and nor do I wish to, both on my own and through the works of other analysts. I'll point you toward their individual channels or videos when I explore an idea which they had influence over. Therefore, I'm looking forward to reading your comments on the various aspects of the game I'll be covering, be it from a place of agreement and further elaboration, partial or total dissent, radically different viewpoints, or whatever you feel like saying. After all, there is a limit to what one man can do, and I expect to end up making videos delving into subjects referred to throughout this one in the future. The real thing goes down in the comments section. As a disclaimer, I'm not here to talk about the technical side of things. Texture popping issues, audio mixing, and the like fall outside the scope of this video. Same goes for the lip syncing and the English dub or any nuance lost in translation I wouldn't know about because I'm not fluent in Japanese. Yeah, censorship sucks, and the rushed voice direction tarnished the voice acting, but the localization can't be that bad all things considered. The different regional accents were superb, if nothing else. Finally, some of my proposed changes may not mesh fully well with others. I'll try to point these cases out when relevant, just keep that in mind. With that being said, without further delay, let's begin the experiment. In architecting a reworked Xenoblade Chronicles 2, 100% say both fans and naysayers alike will struggle to envision a preferable starting point than the egregious tutorials, and they'd be on the money. These range from pleonastic and neglectful to outright intrusive. You can't tell me you weren't hyped for the fight against Malos and severing the ancient ship, just for it to be interrupted time and again by untimely tutorials. To make matters worse, some of these tutorials aren't even of pertinence at the time. That wouldn't be an issue if it wasn't for the fact that you can't go back and watch them again. Did I say watch? I must have meant read, because the tutorials are plenty verbose for how poorly they serve their purpose. The game systems are hardly known for being easy to understand, so they really shot themselves in the foot with this one. They could make use of some pics or diagrams to supplement the explanations, and they should make use of a tutorials menu to double check things if in doubt. Credit where it's due. If there's anything Xenoblade 2 could salvage from 1, that'd be the tutorials. Since we're already working on the pacing of the tutorials, why not take the opportunity to just pace the entire early game mechanical progression appropriately, starting with auto-attack cancels, which could have been hinted at as soon as the opening fight of the game against the King crossed it. First come, first served. But let's take things up a notch. Rex could have had access to the rest of his future Aegis sword arts from the very beginning, and a colorless level 1 special, the likes of which would be explained on the ancient ship, before expanding on blade combos in Chapter 2. The ally reviving capabilities of the party gauge could be brought to the player's notice no later than the first fight there. On that note, a higher level enemy could be added to the area to put that knowledge to test, or else teach the player how to run away, something the first fight fails to account for. Slap on a field skill check for Sever and or Drawmark while you're at it. I'll keep going when I get to Chapter 2, but with these changes the gameplay would already flow much more smoothly from the get-go. Combat isn't the only thing that's in dire need of superior clarity. Item management is hell on Alrest. The inventory is stuffed with, well, stuff, the purpose of which isn't made very clear from browsing through it. Navigating it should be a much more intuitive process. Some sub-menus to sort items out and wheel menus to select them based on their properties could do the trick. Crafting recipes and the like could be displayed in that way, and potential Aux Core materials should be marked as such. About Aux Cores, it would be nice if they implemented some limited way to combine repeated ones into an immediately higher leveled one of the same kind. There could be some sort of gadget with a capped refinery level and a finite number of uses, which would recharge and increase when the party first interacts with the corresponding Titan's furnace of sorts. These restrictions could be lifted once the party reaches the World Tree. Still, I'd keep level 6 Aux Cores locked behind tough challenges. Also, for the love of the architect, let us fuse Sunlight Eye and Night Vision cores. Please, Father? Aux Cores aren't the items which stand to benefit most from some refinement though. That dubious honor would go to pouch items. Buckle up, because this is a long section. It is no overstatement to say that pouch items come across as painfully inconvenient in their current state. The fact that they use up in real time despite only being useful in combat, on top of being exhaustible and at times expensive consumables, makes them feel like a waste of resources waiting to happen, even when that is not actually the case. Pouch items are also unevenly balanced, rewarding some categories universally over others. Be it qualitatively, quantitatively, some of these effects appear to be so insignificant you could just disregard them and never look back. Especially so in the early game, when you're still getting a grip on the different mechanics these pouch items could have an effect on. If you're learning anything at all from the Architect Forsaken tutorials, that is. This makes it so that not even a character's favorite items may seem worth using. And rightfully so, for oftentimes they are not, and for the very reasons stated before. This is clearly a matter of every issue compounding on every other issue to make pouch items feel expendable. So, I've cooked up a few ways to incentivize their use. First things first, make the timer only count down while in battle. Second, and paramount, many of their effects feel negligible, so balance them out in an effort to make them feel tangible. Enough for players to make sense of a category of pouch items as the more advantageous one to tackle a specific scenario. Ultimately, the battle system at large is all about the execution of optimized strategies. Being situational should be a point in their favor, not to their detriment. In order to accomplish that, the challenge design of the game should also be given further thought. That's our main culprit. I'll dive deeper into concrete examples later. For now, the aim is to make players put 2 and 2 together, having in advance provided them with the necessary tools to reach and apply that conclusion. There's a certain series-defining mechanic that could benefit immensely from having its availability boosted by pouch items. Chain attacks are pretty much not a thing in the early game, as low-level enemies might be dead by the time you're able to fill your party gauge, let alone finish a blade combo to set up an elemental orb. Some pouch items could help the player get a taste of the magic. Still, I'm of the opinion that such a mechanic should be gated to a degree to avoid trivializing such an intricate battle system by eclipsing the viability of other mechanics. Maybe these items could be made pricier for this end. Be careful though, as much as we want pouch items to stand out more, they shouldn't be trampling accessories down. Regarding favorite pouch items, the bonus applied to their effects could be amplified and, to the extent possible, the different characters' skill sets would be designed with these in mind. By the way, one of Rex's favorite pouch items should be available for purchase in Argentum, along with the corresponding pouch items tutorial. To wrap pouch items up, the base game could take some nodes from Torna and implement campsites where they could be crafted. The recipes for certain campsite exclusive pouch items would have to be bought beforehand for huge sums of gold or late in the game, so as not to render money obsolete as a resource. Much bigger bang for your buck than a 2-line tutorial from Turuni, if you ask me. Story-wise, the only thing I could contemplate folding Chapter 1 for is the fact that Pyra and Rex are able to pull off Burning Sword. Call it Ludo narrative or Naira narrative, they'd both make for good no-po names, but the dissonance is there. If the goal was to give us an appetizer of what Rex and Pyra will be able to do together, that's fine. Hell, it even makes sense if we count it as the first of many instances of Pyra overburdening herself throughout the first few chapters. On to chapter 2. Now is the time to teach the player about blade combos. And who'd be more qualified than our resident Flesh Eater Nia to propose that Rex should chain Pyra's fire specials with Bromark's water ones for explosive results?
There's even some fog in Gormod's lower level to evoke that notion, so what better place to get our feet wet?
Even then, there's no point in explaining blade combos if they aren't going to see meaningful play. Therefore, some of the unique monsters or quest enemies throughout Gormod and later Uriah could be repurposed to put these teachings to practice. One could argue this could be achieved by upping their health without upping their damage. The party's damage might be too high to end the combo otherwise. However, we don't want to turn these early encounters into damage-sponging slugfests. As a matter of fact, I intended to later suggest lowering the level or HP of some of Gormod's unique monsters, so that a bit less of the Titan's territory has its exploration gated on this initial trip. It would seem we're at a crossroads. Don't fret, there's a course of action we can follow. All it takes is to make these educational enemies highly resistant to one of our available blade elements and very weak to another. And, wouldn't you know, that's exactly what elemental weaknesses achieve. We're going to take it a step further and make it so there are clear-cut strategies to withstand some of these tougher yet assailable enemies. Those would be to seal Self-Destruct, to seal Stench, and to seal Shackle Driver. That's right, the blade combo effects resulting from successfully completing one with any of the 3 story blades present in this chapter, counting the artificial one. That will teach them. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves with the Poppi talk. Aren't we forgetting someone down in the Forgotten Waste? Gramps was the one who took us to Gormod in the first place by crash landing there. Show your elders some respect. That being said, Azurda's quite a headache. Let's address the ancient sorrows in the room. How does he revert to his larval stage? What exactly is the science behind that? And why don't all the other dying, medium-sized titans in this crumbling Alrest, who are presumably enduring a world of hard too, go the larval route instead? Let's keep things simple and have him chronically break his wings instead. Speaking of Azurda exclusive titan perks, why is he the only titan who is ever seen speaking? It is not unthinkable for titans to speak when one considers their past as blades, but it bears repeating. Why is Azurda the only one actually doing so? What's the matter? Gormoti got your tongue? Give some of these smaller sized titans one-liners. That's all I'm asking for. The next question to tackle would be what to do with Azurda, if it's no longer plushy sized. Well, if Fonsett's theme being named after him is anything to go by, being able to sail across the cloud sea on Gramps' back might have been a scrapped idea. This isn't too far-fetched at all, seeing as that's the same track playing when Rex respawns in the checkpoint on his back after performing the death glitch right before registering Goldmouth Landmark for the first time. Azurda could be found skirting the shore of the navigable Titans during high tide. The tidal effects are something I was also raring to bring attention to. Gormod and Mor Ardain are where they are at their best, without a shadow of a doubt. Granted, they could have played more of a role in Torrigoth, but that's about it. Naturally, they would be out of place in Uriah and Tantal, but it'd be cool if the islets in Leftheria's rigid waters rose and fell to different heights with the tide. Only the rigid waters. We don't want to flood Fonsett. The Cloud Sea already acts kind of weird around Leftheria, so it wouldn't be impossible. That's nice and all, now let's talk big. The tide could very well be made into a key component of exploration. Let me explain. The most intricate tide puzzles in the game are those which connect Gormod's upper and lower levels. Even so, the impossibility to have the tide change outside of an inn means they aren't really puzzles, just observation tests one can choose to solve when the tide's right. But what if there was another way to wait for the tide to rise or fall? Say hello to the camping mechanic. Remember those campsites we were going to use for crafting? They are camping sites at the end of the day, so I see no reason not to take a nap on them too. A nap long enough for the tides to change. Take into account that the camping sites seen across the Titans are stationary, and as such could only complicate the tide puzzle so much. I will now present 2 alternative ideas. Number 1, let's go beta Dark Souls 3 mode and set up camp wherever. Well, maybe not wherever, solely in places where a campsite would sort of fit. Or maybe yes wherever, and have the party wash up in the nearest shore if they dare to camp in a would-be submerged place. Now for the second one, have Gramps be the party's mobile campsite. In a world where he remained the Titan-sized package, other than for the unusable wings, would be missing out on his helpful battle advice from the safety of Rex's helmet. In exchange, when camping on his back, we could get more of those elusive allusions to his past and the nature of a Titan's life from time to time. Azurda wasn't known for his eloquent dialogue to begin with, so it'd be a fine trade, were we to go through with it. The tide rising and lowering in real time would be more realistic and result in time-sensitive puzzles. That's a given, but I'm banking on the fact that it wouldn't be technologically feasible. It's about time the party arrived in Torrigoth and took a short rest from all this exploration. We were discussing items a while back, so let's partake in the local economy. Items aren't the only thing we're acquiring when spending money, you know. We're also inadvertently purchasing development level points for Gormod. This is way too easy a way to level up a nation's dev level. For my money, each of a nation's development levels should be locked behind the completion of a set amount of side quests, or of a predetermined series of quests instead. Money can't buy happiness. Show some commitment to the nation's people as well. An area affinity chart akin to Xenoblade 1's could be incorporated in the process. It would be relegated to more of a visual flourish, as a cursory glance would reveal that side quests in 2 are fewer than in 1, and interconnected ones are far between. In return, they tend to be more finely executed and less of a bloat overall. We've been covering puzzles and quests, but what's a Xenoblade quest without a second-rate quest marker? Unless the precise location of the quest's objective is specified in the mission briefing, its distance and relative position away from the player shouldn't be displayed. An exception could be made for fetch-based quests, which consist of fighting previously encountered enemies or picking up registered collection point drops. To circumvent this lack of semi-accurate coordinates, mission briefings could offer more of an insightful guidance. That way, the whereabouts of the objective could be worked out by applying this information to the player's prior or future observational knowledge. Something analogous could be done for affinity chart nodes which require the player to defeat a certain species of enemy or collect a particular item. A general minimap location of the objective in question could be consulted if the player had so much as targeted or obtained it beforehand, respectively. On paper, this makes for a much more engaging way for these expeditions to unfold. Even if the quest marker no longer sucks, the option to hide it or other elements of the HUD is long overdue. I'm genuinely baffled by the fact this feature flew under the radar and was never patched into the game, especially when the Cloud Sea encompasses such beautiful and vibrant vistas. Attentive listeners will have caught on to me saying the words registered and consulted a couple moments ago, but where? We're taking a page from the previous 2 Xenoblade games and bringing the Collectopaedia back, with a bestiary to boot. Extra information on the different species, such as drops and exploitable weaknesses, could be added to the bestiary once defeated. Where did we leave off? Torrigoth, wasn't it? Let's talk about Blade Resonance then. We all know about the core crystal gacha system and how overblown the hate towards it is. It is a poor man's way of ensuring that no 2 playthroughs play the same by providing each player with random blades for them to familiarize with. As it stands, the system lacks any flair whatsoever, but it can't be blamed for not serving its designed purpose of breeding diversity into the game. It's time to make this system fully come to life, and by that I mean to ditch the gacha system for rare blades. Guaranteed rare blade core crystals should be handed as a reward for certain side quests. Some of these could be related to the quest at hand, as is the case with Wulfric among others, while others could be random. Shiba's inherited core crystal loosely fits the first group. The remaining random ones could be scattered all throughout the game as loot from random treasure troves or drops from unique monsters. This is the system I want to believe the team at Monolith Soft would have ideated had they been given more time to develop the game. Taking the DLC quests into account, it would seem they also planned to make quests involving several rare or legendary blades interacting with one another. I'll preface the following by making it clear that I'm aware that this is just asking for more for the sake of it, and that game devs have to draw the line somewhere. Now then, I'd love to see more of where those came from. Some of my favorite blade quests already held that distinction precisely because of those interactions. See Zenobia, Theory and Praxis. so I can't see it being anything other than net positive for the game. On a similar note, rare blades must have undergone blade resonance with a number of drivers before the current one in order to have become rare blades, since the predefined designs and personalities of the ones we meet in the game were clearly not derived from the party's drivers. For this very reason, blade quests can't shed any light on their current drivers' selves, to say nothing of the additional inconsistencies overdrive protocols could bring on were that to be the case. In view of this, earlier resonances of some of the rare blades could be alluded to more often. This could be accomplished via their obtention side quest, as is the case for Ves, as part of their blade quest, Heralds being an example of this, or at the very least through NPC dialogue. It's finally time to cross verbal blades over field skill checks, and let me tell you, I have no plans of removing them. No shot! Quite the contrary actually. Let's invoke Pokemon for a second. It's no secret that the main catch of that franchise lies in the Pokemon themselves. Thus, when the time came to design the exploration of the game, they determined it would be ideal to tie to the creatures you had captured, just as the combat did, so as to deepen your bond with them. This is how hidden machines, or HMs for short, must have been conceived. It's genius when you think about it, at least in theory. In practice, it just makes their overall lackluster implementation that more of a shame, to the point they dumped the mechanic from Gen 7 on. Well, I understand field skill checks as the Xenoblade 2 equivalent of HMs, hence why I endorse them. No, seriously, this time around I want to see them shine with all their splendor, at least relative to the ambitions of the game. For a start, Xenoblade 2 and Torna already do a much better job of contextualizing blade combat than Pokemon ever did. Let me warn you in anticipation that this might call for drastic changes in the structure of the game's exploration, and it would perhaps be deemed unviable or needlessly restraining upon testing. Call me crazy for this, but I want to increase, not decrease, the number of field skill checks. There's no shortage of them as is, so I'm thinking more of mid to late game designated areas. I had Lower Tantal and the Descent there in mind, along with higher level sub-areas in formerly visited Titans, but the occasional check could be fit in earlier on to shine a light on their importance. For example, a treasure trove could be placed in Alba Cavenage in such a way that it was clearly in sight, yet the path to reaching it was blocked by a light mastery check which Mythra alone couldn't pass. Many of you might be clamoring for the complete opposite, and I can already picture you pointing your metaphorical pitchforks at me. But please entertain my idea a little longer. Before all hell breaks loose, all field skill checks obligatory for plot progression can now be passed with the main story blades alone. What's more, I'm making a compromise by increasing the number of field skill checks while simultaneously lowering the requirements, especially for back-to-back different field skill checks. This would make the divergence in the rare blades resonated with from playthrough to playthrough more transcendental. And let me remind you that these would no longer be pulled from the gacha system, so there's no brute forcing your way around checks while interrupting the natural pacing of the game. Maybe you got to access a sub-area in Uraya much earlier than other players. In exchange, you couldn't lay your hands on that treasure trove in Temperantia. So far, yet so close you can almost taste it. These are the kinds of branches I want to see naturally sprout from the blade system. I have also contemplated the idea of alternative field skill checks, obstacles which could be overcome with different rational actions. This would exponentially increase the complexity of designing meaningfully distinct possibilities, but I reckon it would be worthwhile. The remaining fruits of my brainstorming are a bit more out there. Having the active blades element affect the player's traversal could be fun. On screen, you'll see my preliminary ideas for each element. Fire blades reduce terrain damage. Water blades make the player swim faster. Ice blades increase the grip on icy surfaces. Wind blades lower fall damage. Ground blades dig up extra collection points. Electric blades speed up mechanical stuff. Dark blades shrink the player's aggro range. And light blades illuminate dark places. Many of these could be repurposed as implicit effects of actual elemental field skill checks all the same, as is already the case in-game. After all, what are field skill checks if not an abstraction of set skills? I also considered making driver-dependent checks, but even I'd agree that'd be taking things too far. Found myself wandering to other titans again. It's Torrigoth we were in, and it's high time we rescued Nia from the Titan battleship. We breezed past the Ardanian soldiers thanks to the Aux Cores retained from the newly added obligatory side quest which acts as a tutorial for the mechanic. Time to kick Dougal's ass. The party is now comprised of 3 drivers, making it the perfect opportunity for Torna to explain the spectacular chain attacks he read about in Addam Tataso's notes, and for the party to unleash one Dougal Dolns. We'll also unshackle the drivers from the 2-blade limit as soon as they bond with 3 blades. Some of you might have not even been aware of that restriction. The fact that they'd go to such lengths to arbitrarily gate off so many mechanics boggles the mind. Dougal's down, but the Special Inquisitor and her blade, the jewel of the Empire, live up to their names. Or at least they should. Don't worry, I'm not about to start blabbering about how you win in the battle but lose in the cutscene, because I know nothing could be further from the truth. Just as field skill checks are an abstraction of the blade's abilities, battles are meant to be an abstraction of what happens in the cutscene. The subset of games we label as JRPGs tend to value telling their story in a very deliberate way, over honouring the interactivity video games as a medium allow for. As a result, they end up having to play around these situations by resorting to the aforementioned abstractions. This is a self-induced trade-off more mechanically immersive games organically bypass. Contrary to popular belief, Xenoblade 2 stays coherent and consistent in these abstractions. If you manage to end the battle favourably, the party will somehow pull off the win, even if it isn't through combat-related means. However, these battles are still not an accurate representation of the power levels in action. Levels are, by nature, a quantitative representation of qualitative power, that is to say, an abstraction. Even though I don't expect abstractions to be perfect representations, I believe the levels of story-related boss fights could stand to be truer to the gap in power levels. This whole spiel brings us back to Morak and Bridget. If it was up to me, these fine ladies would be at a level more representative of their ranks and firepower. The party would have to tough it out big time until Rex and Poppi topple the water tank. I've devised 2 possible ways to go about this fight. The first one would consist of realizing that Bridget is a defensively oriented blade who gets stronger the more attacks her driver dodges, making attacking from afar or running away and healing the best strategy until the water tank cutscene time is up. The second would be to have the combat perimeter encircle the water tank, and for it to be a selectable target. In this alternate possibility, the water tank cutscene would trigger the moment the player works out that Rex should anchor shot the water tank. This second approach comes with its pros and its cons. It gets the player much more involved in the action than the first, but the rest of the game hasn't been retooled to allow for this kind of interactivity anywhere else, making this a misleading anomaly. Regardless of the option one picks, it'd be the new designated moment for anchor shot to start toppling. Also, to keep things internally consistent, future battles against Morak and Bridget would see their level ever so slightly increased. By the time they join the party, their levels should be roughly the same. Same goes for Zeke and Pandoria in their various encounters, and for Vandham for his short stints as first foe and then friend. A trip to Umans and a friendly greeting from a Aion later, the party find themselves in Uriah. Shortly after, Rex and company meet Vandham and the Garfond mercenaries. This is as good a time as any to bring up how much of an utter waste of time Merc missions constitute, beyond the role of painting a picture of the current development and societal state of each Titan by way of their inhabitants. The manner in which Garfond mercenaries are put to work leaves a lot to be desired. Yeah, you get to gather more resources while you're exploring somewhere else, but that isn't fun in and of itself, not even as the crudest excuse for an optimization exercise. They represent a self-contained problem and don't contribute a thing to the gameplay. One could argue I'm being too harsh on them, and that they aren't that much of a stain of the game. Just ignore them if you find them to be so awful. They are there for extra resources at the end of the day. To that, I would counter by reminding you that they hurt the game in as much as they waste the player's time with dull menu work instead of having them engage with the core gameplay. The integration of such a mechanic would consequently be superfluous, or, by contrast, raise a red flag as to why the core gameplay would necessitate it. There is one counter-argument I would entertain. one that I myself laid out earlier in this video. If Xenoblade, more so 2 than X and 1, is no more than a game of putting resource management into action, then the rearrangement of your blades would pertain to core gameplay. The thing is, Merc missions are titan pads below the standards of the game in that regard, while locking you out of using your blades for something worthwhile in the meantime. Unfortunately, the game draws from the premise that such a thing doesn't exist. This is a band-aid solution to a self-inflicted wound all the same. The blood trickles down from the clashing notions of designing the game around each player having their unique experience with the blade system and wanting everyone to try everything out all at once. They came up with a vast array of alternatives and no way to ensure you have enough of each. All in all, it's a matter of the game wanting to have its hot rubies themed bun, and it did too. Frankly, I don't have a foolproof answer to this conundrum. One would probably have to replan the game from scratch to find one, if at all possible. In keeping the game true to its essence, I can narrow the pool to 2 forthright answers. Keep Merc missions or do away with them. Were Merc missions to stay, an option could be to reframe them as Common Blade exclusive. One of them could even reward the player with a guaranteed rare blade core crystal, that of a cultivated Common Blade whose defunct driver you transferred it to. Refresh my memory, how do overdrive protocols work exactly? Potential clarifications on minor mechanics aside, that's just a possibility. Rare blades could still be dispatched no problem. Anyhow, if they are going to optimize the fun out of the game, at least keep things coherent and make it so that affinity chart nodes with area-specific requirements only progress if they take place in that specific area, notified in the node. Conversely, Merc groups could be wiped out from the face of Alrest, no trace of their existence to be left behind. Keep in mind I said Merc groups, not Merc missions. A series of combat or field skill based challenges could be issued by Ju and Tsuo to replace Merc missions as we know them. This would entail removing all Merc group skills, which would render Common Blades rather obsolete from a gameplay standpoint. I'm not counting Orb Master, because the game shouldn't be encouraging you to battle with generic Common Blades over the more developed and characterized Rare Blades. That is, unless the narrative department is willing to follow through, perhaps in a fashion similar to the one I outlined when I touched on making them a more integral part of Merc missions. At any rate, removing them outright would make for a bad call from a narrative standpoint. I don't believe the game could do without them altogether, in the way it could without Merc missions. Given this circumstance, just like this section addressed the futility of Merc missions, the following one could try to salvage Common Blades as a part of the gameplay. Once again, I can think of 2 ways to handle them, depending on the alternative you opted for in the prior section. On one hand, they could be designed with Merc missions and only Merc missions in mind, making them the optional gateway of choice to extra resources. On the other hand, they could work as weaker, placeholder versions of stronger rare blades the player has yet to resonate with. As I said before, they should be weaker than rare blades in terms of combat competence and raw numbers, but their generic nature thus make them more splashable, and they could retain some of their niche skills so long as those didn't push their battle proficiency over the edge. The stats of newly resonated Common Blades could also scale with blood progression, peaking when Rex becomes the master driver, and then again in the post-game. Speaking of the post-game, the process of maxing out the different combat stats should be streamlined. It's too much of a hassle right now. Stuff like favorite pouch items working like love sources from S to S plus trust, skill and weapon points being earned at higher rates the higher the trust level, or idea stats increasing passively when using a blade of their corresponding element would go a long way in making things more palatable. In other words, trust the process. But I'm getting carried away again. Let's head back to Garfond Village. This idea is a bit out there, and quite impractical in a world where skip travel is a thing, but the act of swapping party members and blades in and out of the party could be limited to Garfond Village, inns and the like. That would include campsites or Azurda's back, depending on which one you lean toward. Even though most field skill checks only need to be passed once, removing instant access to blades would still frustratingly drag out the consecutive different checks which don't. One last thing about blades and I'm done, I promise. This is the one subject matter you've all likely seen coming. balance. Not gonna lie, I was saving the most popular for last. From roles to weapon types to individual blades even, blades are blatantly unbalanced. Let's take things a level of specificity at a time, increasingly. First come roles. It doesn't bode well for tanks and healers when the supremacy of attackers is so clear for all to see. Between their better arts and accessories which make the most of their higher damage output, they cover the opportunity cost of foregoing the other roles in spades. As their name would imply, healers are over-adjusted for healing and lacking in other departments. There is such a thing as too much healing. After all, the HP bar only goes so far. This means healers pay dearly for their skills, since hardly ever do they see the benefits of providing uncalled for amounts of recovery. Self-healing attackers easily outclass them in most situations. Friendly reminder that critical healing 1 is more than enough for Poppi Cutie Pie's self-sustainability. As for tanks, they literally can't keep up with the aggro generated by attackers, or even healers. And let me tell you, that's quite a predicament when your whole role revolves around taking hits in the other's stead. Not that tanks necessarily tank any more proficiently than the non-defensively minded roles, whose effective HP get boosted through their diverse avenues of healing. To be honest, I'm not sure how healers or tanks should be buffed without turning them all into Hazes and Hugos, respectively. I don't want to overtune them either, lest they just overthrow the attackers as the overpowered role. This is once again just brainstorming on my behalf, but something like turning excess healing into different types of buffs or extra damage for healers sounds neat, whereas tanks could be repurposed as a more driver combo centric role with aggro linked to that system. The world is your Archon and I'm all ears. There must be someone who has butted head with this topic already, someone who has something more valuable to contribute with than I do. Until then, I'll confine myself to asking for nerfs to the ruling class, in ways that make them less of an all-purpose bunch. They should, at the very least, make more sacrifices to their offensive capabilities if they want to take on a more generalist role. Next in line would be weapon types. I will be brief. Buff shield hammers. Rounding things off with individual blades. I can't tell you how each and every blade should be changed, but I will leave you with some general guidelines. Does the blade at hand have a useless or redundant skill for their progression? That's a battle skill slot that could be put to better use. Make sure not to mistake features for bugs. Some battle skills help balance blades through separate stages of progression. Think of a blade who's comparatively weak early game, but gets a huge power spike from a late game affinity chart unlock, for example. Asymmetrical balance is fun, so the more unique gimmicks a la Shiba, the better. If they already have gimmicks, make them more focal to their playstyle, or at least viable and potentially synergistic. We want rare blades to be special, and we want drivers and blades to work in tandem. As a last resort, tweak those numbers if necessary. Quantitative variations can have qualitative effects. I'll put my money where my mouth is and request nerfs for most DLC blades. They are the worst offenders in my balancing crusade. And let every blade equip 3 Aux Cores. One by default, a second one after completing their affinity chart, and the third one at S+ Trust. It ain't that hard. Regardless of how each particular blade would turn out following these adjustments, the challenge design of the game should reflect those changes and demand mindfulness from the player. Unique monsters and challenges should be designed to favor certain kinds of blades over others, as a natural result of their traits. Look to diversify them. Combat interactions should be the ones put in the unique in unique monsters. The following won't be an apples-to-apples comparison, but similar as Xenogears and Xenoblade 2 may be, not even the original Xeno game turned a blind eye to the importance of challenge design. Xenogears' mechanical depth isn't as fleshed out. On-foot combat arguably peaks before the halfway point, but the challenge kept offering a bevy of equal parts refreshing and straightforward situations for the party to bear fangs at. Back to the Future. A game with as much substance as Xenoblade 2 could put its systems to use more often. For example, reaction-inflicting enemies could be less sparse. Tanks could be particularly resilient to reactions or have parry stances to deflect them onto the enemy. Who knows? Allow me to wedge in a petty remark. Nullify reaction should work like debuff cancel if the blade's driver is already under the effects of one. Anyway, more specialized interactions. Finch forgetting about Malice's Monado armor will never fail to make me chuckle. Ooh, come on. Yeah, keep it coming. Just let us know in advance what the damned affinity chart nodes do. The player should be transparently informed of the activation requirements and probabilities of each blade art, down to the decimal point. Don't despair, the gameplay ramblings will soon be over. Vandham will be the one doing the talking for the last batch of tutorials. Him tagging along makes the party's pool 4 drivers deep, and since he's no longer in charge of teaching Rex how to topple, he'll be breaking all our expectations instead by revealing the possibility to fight with 4 drivers at once. Sounds unbalanced, you say? Never mind balance, it will be the least of our concerns. In fact, it's kept in check by the internal logic of the world of Alrest. The ether flow each blade could transfer to that driver would fall below the sustainable threshold as a result of the ether concentration in the air being spread more thinly with the introduction of a 4th driver in the mix. Affinity gains, ether-based arts, and other stats would be scaled down accordingly. The 4th driver would also come with a 4th party gauge bar. However, in keeping with the game's difficulty, chain attacks would have to be nerfed in an analogous fashion as a Bringer of Chaos counterpart, if not downright removed. The probability of inflicting a driver combo status should also take a hit. Oh, and let's not forget that enemies can be drivers too, so play fair if you don't want to incur these penalties. If his name precedes him, which it does, Vandham should know a thing or 3 about leadership too. The Garfond mercenaries boss could school his heir apparent in the art of commanding his troops. Incidentally, the L trigger is currently devoid of any assigned combat functionality. This is the perfect chance to kill 2 Ansos with 1 stone toss. Holding it down could open a sub-menu akin to that behind the R trigger, giving way to 4 basic battle commands, 1 for each of the face buttons. We could use the D-pad for an extra 4 options, for a total of 8, but that might be overdoing it. 4 sounds like a good middle ground between diluting our attention from the player-controlled driver and only being able to hypothesize what the other drivers might prioritize on the basis of their sex. This is where I disclose the main problem posed by the 4th driver. One of those commands would have to be their Blade Special command. When there are 3 or less drivers in play, it'd be a useless Vandham-looking icon. It definitely won't be responsible for jerking tears ex post facto. On the delicate topic of his death, Vandham is conspicuously unwilling to resonate with more blades. I see no reason as to why that would be the case other than condescending hand-holding on the dev's part. I'd be down for the big guy sticking to his own gun knives, or dual scythes, in that respect, but his ethos should be made clear in that case. That's the only contextualization I'd consider legit, let it be known. A core crystal always substantiates the same blade upon resonance, so even if they were reluctant to have players lose their hard-earned progress, at least it would only be the affinity charts that reset. As long as the core crystals wound up unscathed in their pockets, the remaining driver's ability to resonate with said blades would remain equally intact. It's the case for rock, and it'd be the same for any other blade Vandham had resonated with. Vandham's lessons will not be forgotten, but, for the time being, we'll be moving on to other pressing matters. Pressing buttons matters, that is. The dopamine shot from cancelling an auto-attack into an art is unmatched, and that's a fact. All the more so when you meet the prerequisites for the art's bonus effect. One of the most common among these effects, especially germane to attackers, comes in the form of extra damage from arts sensitive to the driver's relative position to the enemy. It's no coincidence that the Aegis sword comes with 2 of these hearts. The secondary conditions are mechanically intricate, a positioning versus immediate damage tug of war, and a lesson in aggro management. Once the positional requirement is met, the damage dealt goes up, and with it the aggro accrued, starting the process all over again. Drivers aren't doing damage while on the move, so they'll eventually drop aggro and be able to get to their preferred spot once again. That's all well and good, until you notice that I kicked off the sentence with, drivers aren't doing damage while on the move. It was a clever change from previous Xenoblade entries to make it so that you can interrupt your auto-attacks by just moving. It honors your choice to auto-attack or not, and comes with the added perk of animation cancelling the first one. The ebb and flow of the combat rides on the back of auto-attacks building up arts, which in turn fill up the recharge gauge of specials to then be used in blade combos. Meanwhile, you'll be working on setting up driver combos for the brilliant fusion combos, which show what drivers and blades can accomplish together. Seal the deal with a chain attack when convenient. A real piece of work. You won't be climbing towards that goal if you don't take the first step though. Nothing wrong with locking mechanics behind decision making, but when that mechanic happens to be the conduit for your whole combat system, you might want to contemplate if there's another path to fit it through. Such a bridge does exist. Enemy turning speed is too high for our drivers to maneuver around once aggro has been pulled. The scales were always tipped, hence why repositioning was brought up in the first place. One could have approached the dilemma from the other side and argued for the inclusion of mobility arts, but that's not my intention. Those would be fun in their own right, I wouldn't mind a couple blades getting one, but they wouldn't do anything for the applicability of auto attacks in the late game, or lack thereof. They would just skip the issue entirely. Not to mention, the proliferation of this kind of arts would call for a reassessment of the combat system as a whole. Why then, one would sensibly ponder, not make the most of these by differentiating appendages for the player to target? This would organically give rise to additional revisions, straying further and further from the original framework of Xenoblade 2 combat and regressing into a Xenoblade X Chimera. Crucially, these would direct the focus away from the already splendid set of mechanics at the heart of Xenoblade 2. Therefore, behold at last my revolutionary idea: auto-attack cancel speed boosts. Whenever you successfully cancel an auto-attack, the driver you control will gain a short speed boost. The oomph of that speed boost will vary depending on your cancel timing and the auto-attack you are cancelling in the combo. Buff the second and third auto-attacks in the sequence across the board while you're at it, and we're done. Simple yet effective, that's what's what. For the last set of gameplay changes, we'll be tackling blade combos. The routes could follow a more intuitive pattern, one which more strongly reinforces the idea of opposites the game has going on. Something like a special chaining to either another special of the same element or one of the opposite one, and lastly to the initial element or to an element from each of the other idea pairs, the others being finishers for complementary elemental blade combo starters. For example, fire to fire or water to fire or ground or ice or light, and water to water or fire to water or electricity or wind or dark. Admittedly, this runs counter to my claims about wanting to avoid homogenization whenever possible, so I'm not fully sold on it. We can push the asymmetry agenda within blade combos by giving them different effects. The damage over time effect of Volcano is cool and all, but just like some finishers have knockback and others blowdown, other blade combos could inflict attack, block, accuracy or evasion debuffs on the enemy, if not the respective buff on the driver whose blade completed it. Improving the readability of the player's options is always to be welcomed, but it's arguably even more important for enemies to have sufficiently telegraphed tells, in order that we can exercise as much agency as possible over our responses to their attacks. Whenever an enemy commences an attack, symbols signaling the effect of the attack and the duration of said effects could follow its name text box. These very same symbols could accompany the icons for the blade combo routes, reducing the amount of on-screen noise. Prior to leaving for Fonsett, I have a snag regarding an Avid play reader. As far as we know, Akhos shouldn't be sharing a design theme with the Torna era blades, that being their Tornan armor. There's no evidence of Jin's rescue mission taking place shortly after the fall of Torna. Akhos could pass as Tornan back then, but his devoured driver didn't look the part. It's a deal of ensuring visual cohesion at the expense of coherence. Rare blade designs already struck that balance with their paradoxically cohesive artistic cacophony, as befits their nature. I'm gonna be honest, Nomura's been influencing Xeno character designs since before the very beginning, so Monolith Soft was probably just letting their distinguished guest artist work his work. In a fashion, it wouldn't surprise me if it turned out he had an effect on Rex's design. It'd be par for the course knowing the knack Nomura has of sticking an exaggerated amount of bells on his designs. The deck of the ship we embarked on was front-loaded with gameplay cases, but we are leaving the stormy sea behind, so it's smooth sailing from now on. We are moving from Garfond Village to Fonsett, and from playreader to playwriter. Funnily enough, they are both flesh-eaters who run into inconsistencies. About that, why is it that, being a first-hand witness of the events that led to Torna's demise, Minoth aka Cole chose to represent Addam as a triumphant hero instead of a tragic one in his play? The thing is, had anyone other than Minoth written the play, it would have made perfect sense for Addam's feats to be portrayed with all manner of hyperbole. Whether or not he wrote the play, There's something else Minoth does, the rationale of which I don't really buy. What does a Malthus care that Minoth, his renegade blade, has entrusted his gun knife to Rex? Even worse, why would Minoth advise Rex, the driver of the Aegis, to go meet a Malthus, knowing full well the kind of man his driver is? The Praetor was most likely plotting to get his hands on Mythra already. The only thing he would care about in her driver is how manipulable the guy would be. One must trust that Minoth had high hopes in regard to his old partner's new driver and that he would be capable of shaking off Indol's yoke, because otherwise that was ill-advised. It's that time of the video. We are in Chapter 4 proper, the most infamous chapter in the game for how it breaks the pacing of the story. However, this has nothing to do with Torna claiming some of the spotlight like many would have you believe. Yes, the resourceful furball overcoming his inferiority-superiority complex early into the game doesn't lead to as thrilling an outcome as Hammers, but you can rely on Poppi for carrying the tiger's share of the weight later on. That's what being driver and artificial blade is all about. What's truly concerning is that a chapter name of Aegis be so divorced from the main conflict of the titular girls. I seek to rectify this by enriching the plot points present throughout this chapter without overhauling them. First and most flagrant, Roxas core crystal and the glorified fetch quest involved in it. What a pitiful excuse to beat around the bush. I'm not going to call it an utter waste of time. It does the job of stressing the repercussions of the socio-political juncture between the Empire of Mor Ardain and the recently annexed Imperial Province of Gormott, and reminds the player that there's a lot of uncharted territory in previously visited Titans. With this and all, I can't shake off the feeling that this needlessly dragged out detour only ends up serving as a shoddy distraction from the next main quest objective. This could have very well been a side quest, embroiling a rare blade who wasn't plot critical like Rock. Alternatively, the Gormotti kids could have been heading to Alba Cavendish to confront their invaders on their home turf. Their goal would be to reach a diplomatic compromise with the Ardanian troops to have them grant protection against bandits through a series of side quests. They took over Gormott, and they should face the music. That's just an idea. Any course of action which didn't have our party roaming around Alrest when it could be roaming the Wastes would represent an improvement over our current circumstance. For instance, we could forego the kids entirely and skip directly to the party's arrival in Mor Ardain and the ensuing artificial blade incident. Rex and company could even be arrested by Ardanian soldiers in Port Hangar at the site of Poppi. Another instance of time wasting would be the material stakeout Merc mission during Lila's location quest. I'm all for field skills providing alternate progression paths, but this is a one-off main quest thing and the alternative is an absolute bore. In any event, this chapter should leverage its emphasis on technology and the blooming friendship between Torna and Rex to plant the seed for Poppi's and Mythra's budding relationship and parallels. The chapter name could even be changed accordingly to something stemming from Techne. The artificial blade plot point is just one part of the equation when it comes to chapter 4 though, a major one to which we will return in a second, but not without first paying a visit to the Ardanian royal family. It is nothing short of an honor to meet Emperor Niall and Special Inquisitor Morak. The palpable militaristic aesthetics hit as hard as the weather, but we could stand to learn more about their bad harvests and military affairs. This could be achieved by means of an overarching side quest starting in chapter 4 and coming to an end in the very late game in the old but no longer abandoned factory. It could refer all the way back to Hugo and detail the Empire's outlook on Gormott throughout its reigns, and the feuds which brought about the inception of the likes of Lindworm and Brionek, whose deeds would be juxtaposed with those of the ruling Emperor. It is key not to forget that they are fighting their own war in the same vein as the Kingdom of Tantal, so the nuance of their internal and external conflicts shouldn't be discarded in favor of enforced morality. I'ma keep it honest with you people, this subplot isn't necessary at all. Niall's already a great empathetic emperor and cousin stepbro. Mora can call herself a special inquisitor all she wants, but deep down we all know she's a queen, and, needless to say, there's no forgetting Pedrake and the Ardanian soldiers. I just feel like the history of Mor Ardain is a bit hazy for a nation in the middle of almost every international dispute spanning the Cloud Sea of Alrest. Plus, highlighting the Empire's affairs could have the triple purpose of expanding on it, inquiring into its international influences, and making the stagnant state of Alrest and its politics more convincing. Or we could simply improve non-player control driver's glyph detection. That would also help. In keeping with the comparisons between Mor Ardain and other nations, let's check out their looks. Call me racist, but outside of their military attire, Ardanians are the most boring-looking race. Their appearance is no different to that of your run-of-the-mill human, no distinctive features in sight. The chaotic evolutionary process of Alrest humans from the genetic material of the species that inhabited the old Earth is evident in races such as the Gormoti and the Urians, and to a lesser degree in the Torna descendant Leftherians and Tantalese. Well, the degree to which current Leftherians carry Tornan blood is to be determined, seeing as people from other titans, namely Specia, might have migrated to the Heroes' Rest throughout the years, which would explain their moderate diversity. The same can't be said for the isolationist kingdom of Tantal, whose people are direct descendants of High Prince Setter and his entourage. Knowing that to be the case, it's quite the enigma that all Tantalese be red-headed when not all Tornans shared that hair color, most notably Setter. Either more Tornans should have been gingers, including their non-crown prince, or the hair color of King Eulogimenus should match his ancestors. I'm all for ash-colored hair being a recessive gene inherited by Zeke and not by his father, but the royal family of such a secluded nation should look more alike, at least among contemporaries. And what's with those marks on the king's cheeks? The Tornan royal family's signature blue eyes would more than do the trick in this respect, and would also echo the legends of the Fatima Jasper. That would confer Zeke's eye patch and contact additional connotations. The contact should have been golden, by the way, at least until his father exposed his lineage's lies. Back to Ardanians, Morak should also resemble her compatriots. What I mean is that her appearance should mirror the new defining features of the Ardanian men, or maybe the other way around. I was going to suggest having them be taller, which Morak already is, and possibly hunched like their home titan. That would make Niall's short king status even funnier. Inversely, Ardanians could be short people, with over-the-top hats and pointy helmets reserved for their highest military-ranking individuals, Morak being the exceptionally tall anomaly. For real though, I don't want to turn them into caricatures, so the first one is probably the more sensible option. A lot of Torna the Nation talk, and very little Torna the Organization talk so far, just some minutiae about Akhos' design. How convenient then that we are introduced to Patroka and Mikhail at the tail end of the chapter. Let's get to them one at a time, ladies first. The old factory would have been the perfect place to flesh her out, no pun intended, as she did not enjoy as much limelight in Chapter 4 as her quote-unquote brother did in Chapter 3, seeing the bulk of her character development relegated to her dying moments. We know from future events that the assembly of artificial blades in the old factory was Torna's machination, and Patroka would have been the ideal member to have orchestrating the operation. This second ploy involving Bana wouldn't be the only thing she would be pulling the strings of, however. Akhos is a theatre aficionado, and the Patroka I imagine would have a theatrical hobby of her own, that being puppeteering. The woman is Perdido's driver for Klaus's sake. As jaded as she brandishes herself, there's no way in hell she would back down from a quarrel with Akhos about the importance of the role that actors play in a, if you will forgive the repetition, play. Thought-provoking dilemmas aside, their clash of opinions could manifest through their respective blades arts. If Obrona is known for her Shackle Blade special, then Perdido could have Shackle Driver on one of his. Likewise, one of Akhos' arts as Obrona's driver inflicts Shackle Driver, so Perdido on Patroka should have a Shackle Blade art. Her characterization would come together much more nicely with this unassuming change, from her position as the brain behind the Artificial Blade's master plan, to her siblinghood of sorts with Akhos. Torna this, Torna that, what about the Torna cat? The former member of Torna could display a bit more camaraderie, perhaps even attachment, toward her fellow outcasts. At this point in the story, with Haze alive and apparently well, Nia still harbors feelings of longing and hope towards Jin, as a case in point. In Bulge Harbor, she could instinctively attempt to engage in dialogue with her ex-partners in crime. Unlike the Paragon of Torna, whose loving angels instead, Mikhail could reciprocate some of that affection before branding her as a traitor. He's the last of the members of Torna present in the scene, and he wouldn't grimace at some extra exposition either. Quite frankly, it would be more well-founded for Mikhail to flirt with Nia than with Patroka, given his more than likely penchant for the Gormoti, which could be hinted at as early as Chapter 2. On that same line of thought, he should be holding a grudge against Mythra, the cause of Milton's death, not trying to sweet-talk her. If the guy's going to be a womanizer, at least keep things coherent. Mythra's Sacred Arrow settled the not-so-deathly match with Torna once she found a spot from where her level 4 special could be fired. This could have been the player maneuvering into position, but I want to focus on the fact that Sacred Arrow has that limitation at all. More of these situational environmental restrictions would be greatly appreciated, be it in the form of hard-coded conditions in the specials, or lighter variants of Spirit Crucible Elpis's Ether Shutoff. For instance, the different types of weather could have their own in-battle effects. Some think like removing the damage over time of burnout when battling in the rain and giving it to Steam Explosion is what I'm thinking of, but less broadly defined circumstantial interactions would do. Speak of the Aegis, this is one of her only real limitations as a blade, and it seldom comes into play. Mythra is pretty much the game's easy mode in a casual playthrough. Nothing wrong with the more powerful persona of the girl in the cover art being a reliable option in battle. On the contrary, especially when accounting for her nature. The problem arrives when this reliability devolves into over-reliance, overshadowing and disincentivizing the strategic experimentation Xenoblade's combat thrives off. By accentuating the strengths and weaknesses of certain enemies, Mythra could remain a viable pick for these encounters, as she should, without staying on par with the optimal, more specialized choice. But Mythra wasn't the only one putting in work at the end of Chapter 4. Patroclus' enraged state was cut short by the powers of the so-called goddess of Indol, Fanlanorn. The ever-majestic Haze is a fantastic character, from her days as Laura's Blade to her current status as Envoy of the Praetorium, so I will keep things short as Hugo, and as Rex, for the only thing I'll nitpick about is that our protagonist would be explicitly shown gawking at Haze. Why? I mean, I would also be spellbound by Haze's presence, and she's no doubt worthy of admiration, but I can't come up with a single reason other than that. It's not like the boy doesn't already have plenty of food on his plate either. Not to be taken literally, Jin. Jokes aside, the party's quest shall continue. Accompanied by Fanlanorn, they'll be heading for Indol, not without first trekking, swimming, and sliding across Leftheria. A second acquaintance of the Praetor, the almighty Seekinator, will make an appearance before cruising to Indol. Both him and his blade Pandoria will escort the party as they go stifle the military crisis in Temperantia, and after a series of unfortunate events, including the bewildering funeral of Haze, a fate which Emperor Nile avoided by the skin of Nia's fangs, they all leave for the Tantal. Chapter 5 is when the Torna flashbacks start taking shape. Don't sweat it, I'll get to those later. All in good time. My immediate issues come down to Pandoria being our guaranteed introduction to launch arts, a driver combo stage which doesn't work properly. Fix launch time duration, that's it for now. The party arrives to a warm welcome in Theoscoldia Palace, and after freeing themselves from their chamber, they manage to save Pyra from ether annihilation. After the king's speech, she proceeds to project a holographic message from her earring out of the fucking blue. And who would the person in the hologram be? Addam Origo. Get used to hearing his name. So, Pyra's earring. First of all, how does the so-called dumbass understand the technology behind it? Torna was getting by on a technological level better than other nations, but even if Pyra was perfectly able to work with such a gadget, this is several notches above what anyone in Alrest could have handled. But let's imagine for a second it didn't take unified government of Earth science to operate them. The relaying of this message is still outrageously contrived. One can't fault Pyra for trying to negotiate with King Eulogimenus by showing him that message, but one can question the fact that it is never mentioned before or after the fact. On top of that, back in Chapter 2 she offers to sell her earring, which would be negligent on her part if the intention to ever pass the message existed in the first place. At last, we get to the contents of the message. It is implicit in Addam's words to Pyra that he acknowledges his inability to bond with Mythra. That's all fine and dandy, albeit part of a flashback and not of his message. The measures he actually put in place aren't conducive to proving that the person who finds the sealed Aegis will be part of a matured mankind. If what you want is for the relationship between humans and blades to prosper, what kind of trial is being Leftherian and finding a sunken ship? We'll get back to Addam later, I'll let him off the hook for the time being. Right now, Genbu sinking. Omega fetter in hand and in mint condition, Genbu begins its immersion. All is well and good, or so it would seem until Torna's troublemaker trio obstructs the party on their way out of Genbu Crown. Torna's finest are defeated, but not before Jin and Malos appear out of nowhere to save the day. Wait, let's wind things back a bit. Genbu has only been ascending for as long as the death match with Torna lasted. This means that Jin and Malos either A. were there beforehand and just waiting for their brothers-in-arms to get their asses handed to them, or B, set footing Genbu through the hole the laser fired in the Hall of Mystery left on Genbu's forehead. The first would be a scummy move, and it's hard to believe that Genbu had already surfaced for long enough time for the second option to sound plausible. Also, yet another unjustified display of skirt chasing by Mikhail, to the lady without a skirt no less. I will play devil's advocate this time around because Morak is indubitably a looker. On the brink of total defeat at the hands of Jin, Pyra calls upon Siren's power and threatens self-disintegration if it doesn't let Rex and the others live. Impressive for a girl whose firepower, by design, is but a spare droplet of Mythra's. We won't get to see Pyra again until she has awakened as Pneuma at the end of Chapter 7, but having proven herself capable of tapping into Mythra's potential, she could gain some sort of Mythra-related skill buff, with new affinity chart nodes to boot. We would do well to remember that the Aegis girls both shine with their own light, with Mythra excelling at evasion and critical recharge, and Pyra focusing on blade combos and critical damage, and that Mythra should still be the stronger of the two. As much as I would like to have a legitimate reason to turn to Pyra in battle, it would not be unlike her to be averse to drawing upon this newfound power. Rex would respect her decision, but if Jin's reprimand is anything to go by, he has yet to reach that conclusion. Our boy is without his girls, but the rest of the squad managed to put some sense into his Salvager head. It always has been, and always will be, but it's time for us to discuss Rox's place in the plot. Back when I criticized the Stop Thief quest at the beginning of Chapter 4, I didn't specify which plans I had for Rock. On a side note, what's up with the main story quests ending in Chapter 6? Back to Rock, I think it's no stretch to say the game would benefit from bringing him and Vandham's teachings explicitly into focus more often, and I know a way to make sure it doesn't go over people's heads. Rock's core crystal shouldn't be primed for resonance until after Eulogimenus' story time. Yuan Tsuo, who would want their new leader to be the one resonating with him, could have left it under custody of Cole. At this stage, Rex would have no story blades at his disposal, so this would take the party back to Uriah. Once in my playhouse, Cole could invite him to the premiere of his new play recounting Vandham's life. This would remind Rex of the big man's lessons and pluck up the courage to go fight his war. Apropos of their subsequent trip back to Fonsett, Ionia could come along to stay at Azure schoolhouse in light of Cole's feeble state and the looming possibility of his death. Let me tell ya, Minoth would be going out with a bang, as it should be. With Rock by their side, Rex and company would make their way through Spirit Crucible Elpis all the way down to the Vault of Heroes. I already sung the praises of this bona fide dungeon and its scant supply of ether, but it could also be the designated place to have Rock put his miasma dispersal skills into action for the first time. What little ether is left could accumulate in the upper level, drilling into the player what all those gaseous clouds they had encountered on other titans were and how they can now get rid of them. Exploring other titans can wait though. Motus. The going is tough, and the party is between a rock and a hard place. In order to bypass the ether impediments, Rex could do his best Vandham impression and let nothing stop the ether flow, channeling it through Rock's dual scythes stabbed to his torso. There's no stopping Rex's determination, except the fact that he's still but a kid who has skewered himself. It's time to put one's fears aside, now or never. It is Nia's chance to redeem herself in front of herself, to do for Rex what she failed to do for Vandham, to take on the burdens that turned her into the very thing she's been concealing the whole game, so that they no longer weigh her down, but lift her up in her self-realization. To find herself, and to find in herself the will to heal, and the love to become Rex's blade. I don't care if that sounded corny. I love that moment, I love every instance of foreshadowing that leads up to that moment, and I love Nia, and so does Rex. But I love Xenoblade too, and here I am writing an 18,000 word script about how much I appreciate what it falls short at. It goes without saying then, Nia's arc isn't exempt from criticism, that being the detachment of her backstory from the rest of the plot. It has no bearing on anything other than Nia's personal roots, just an exposition dump and a flashback stuffed into a couple cutscenes the minute before they are of relevance. A real shame because, as I said, everything else concerning Nia's struggles is masterfully stringed together. It's just her so-called father and sister that stick out like a sore thumb. Then let's integrate them into the game in some way or another. This idea of mine might be half-baked and a bit on the nose, but it's what I got. There could be a sumptuous, abandoned house removed from the rest of Torrigoth which, when approached, would incite Nia to make a remark saying she feels uneasy around there. At that time, a side quest would appear in the quest list, one without any description or specifications at the first glance. For the side quest to become active, Nia would have to be withdrawn from the active party and stay that way. For that purpose, I already put forward the idea of making party lineup changes exclusive to inns and functionally alike. One could then look for a way into the house, to no avail. It wouldn't be until after Nia finds acceptance in Rex and Oldham guys that the procedure of this side quest would be clarified. Nia's field skills could be required to access her sister's bedroom, where the party would have a heart-to-heart. I know it's missing some meat in between chapters 2 and 7 if I want to fill the gaps in Nia's backstory. I just don't know how to make it so that it belongs at the meat of things, unless more NPCs bring up her old family via dialogue or Merc missions, if not as part of this very side quest. It could comprise all sorts of things, from Gormott the Elder's gossiping about Nia's original driver, to excerpts from his books detailing the surmised influence of Indol in Mor Ardain's occupation of Torrigoth, or even his diary. In short, make Nia's family a normal legend in Torrigoth if necessary, but don't just bring it up the very scene before it becomes pertinent. Between Dromark and this side quest, we're done with Nia's father. Her sister should be simpler. Have Nia make some subtextual comment about the wretchedness of Patroclus and Akhos' siblinghood, and then reconsider her stance in a heart-to-heart with them. The end of the quest could have Nia handing the house keys over to a couple of Gormotti newlyweds, who would thereupon trigger a cutscene of their own. Nia x Rex, blushy crushy for all. Phantasms be gone, we're finally at the hero's tomb. I said I had a couple bones to pick with Addam, and it's about time to do exactly that. Exhibit A. Before addressing the original reason for the party's visit, let's remember how we got here in the first place. In order to access Spirit Crucible Elpis, it is necessary to displace the village guardian statue, the seal of which only answers to Leftherians. This is not the first seal of this kind Rex has encountered throughout the game. The very reason he got involved in all this mess all the way back in Chapter 1 was that the Torna crew needed someone to unlock the entrance to Pyra's resting chamber in the ancient ship. There is no feasible explanation for Addam to have been able to place those seals. The seals themselves are hardly believable. It's not even that they react to ancestry, but to birthplace. And then you have to wrestle with the fact that 500 years ago Alrest wasn't precisely a tech-savvy world, as I pointed out when discussing Pyra's earring. Yet again, these are but trifling matters when compared to the implications of the seals being set with such conditions. As a delicate place as Fonsett is for the upbringing of someone with Rex's attitude, this doesn't rule out people from other titans from having a similar outlook on life, and it isn't mutually exclusive with the reverse happening either. We don't even know for certain where Rex was born, and as much as he shares Addam's golden eyes and mirrors his hairstyle, one wouldn't be remiss for saying he doesn't look characteristically Leftherian at all. These contrivances only serve to demerit Rex as a regular guy and not chosen one. It doesn't matter where he's from, but the seals beg to differ. Let's replace them then. In lieu of the one in the ancient ship, we could have a salvaging tutorial under the guise of a flooded narrow shaft leading to Pyra's chamber. Malos would need someone with salvaging skills, proven by nailing the 3 moderately fast bottom prompts and a small enough physique to feed through the hole and open the hatch from the inside. The opening mechanism would be slow enough for Rex to be captivated by Pyra and for him to make contact with the Aegis sword. The entrance to Spirit Crucible Elpis would follow suit and have its seal swapped for a pond below which it would lie, with an ether cloud blocking the entrance. The time has finally come to touch on the delicate subject of the third sword in the room. To get the good out of the way first, Rex hits the mark with his reflection on Addam's words in the Elysium in the dream and his realization that the sword turning to dust isn't what really carries weight. Now, the very existence of the sword and the fact that it belongs to Addam is bereft of sense. For starters, because there already existed a physical manifestation of Pyra's sword in the ancient ship, one which Addam must have left there himself, presumably after sealing the third sword away in the Vault of Heroes. Yeah, it's quite a doozy. 2 simultaneous materializations of the Aegis sword shouldn't be possible, even less so when one of them is the definitive form. We all witnessed Mythra's sword morphing into the third sword in the Soaring Rostrum 2, and we know that her sword and Pyra share their physical being, just as they share a body. It all comes down to the fact that there's no logical explanation behind Mythra having been able to summon Pneuma's power on that fateful day, and lots of them as to why the opposite should have been true. Pyra's and Mythra's self-realization as Pneuma cannot be made sense of without their bond with Rex. A bond of love, not only romantic, but also, and perhaps more importantly for their awakening, at a spiritual level, one of acceptance through mutual understanding. An emotional embrace in the total sense of the word. The affinity bond between driver and blade. Pneuma. A level of trust Addam and Mythra were never able to develop owing to the context of her resonance and the fear they both bottled up as a result, despite their best efforts to still move forward. It is precisely in this battle against Malos that this incomplete contact shows through, with Mythra's emotional and logical collapse burning whatever remained of the bridges between her and Addam, who can't wield her sword and whose words don't reach her. It asked antithetical circumstances to those which would bring about Mythra's gracious assumption of Pneuma's power, thereby degenerating into gratuitous milking. It would only make sense as a berserk mode last resort, and that's already pushing it. In that same vein, the visions Mythra has of Rex at the end of Torna exceed in several orders of magnitude the timeframes her foresight works with, even once she eventually is enlivened as Pneuma. This has probably got something to do with her aptitude for ether manipulation as part of the Trinity processor and her consequent connection to the conduit, but it's still insane how far into the future she can see in this fit of despair. Let's now dwell on the logical ramifications of being able to gain access to the full power of the Trinity processor core by casting aside self-realization as such and together with the driver, and going berserk instead. By that logic, there are two instances in which Malos could have called on the power of Logos, whatever it may be. One could transpire in this very same showdown, when he's at his highest point, euphoric at his ostensible understanding of the nature of the Aegises. The other one could befall him an eternity later, during the final fight in Aeon's Hangar, Malos' breaking point. His cognitive dissonance would echo Mythra's emotional collapse in the Soaring Rostrum. Ultimately, these situations defy all logic, so let's get them over with. Rex's manifestation in the Dream of Elysium alongside Addam implies the Vault of Heroes is rightfully named. His sepulchre would have sufficed, no need for an impossible third sword to pass on the will he lacked in life. The physical existence of the third sword was a legend of Tantal, and it could have stayed that way. That being said, it's only once he touches the third sword that Rex has the vision of the outcome of the experiment and of the Trinity processor room, at least in the current state of the script. My workaround for this consists of having Addam keep hold of one of Pyra's earrings on his grave. It could have dropped from Pyra's ear upon her creation, further playing up the incompleteness of her asymmetrical design. This missing earring could solve a lot of problems at once. Starting with a vision, this would be its new catalyst. It could also relay an image of the Vault of Heroes to the other earring, which Pyra would have shown to King Eulogimenus instead of Addam's hologram. Working our way even further back to Chapter 2, it would retrospectively reinforce Pyra's disguised self-loathing when she tries to sell it. Of course, Rex would give Pyra back her earring once she awakens as Pneuma, in return for his brand new cutting-edge outfit. They would make Addam proud, unlike the means by which his character was executed in the base game. Blemishes on an otherwise amazingly written character. May he now rest in peace. If I hold Addam in such high regard, it's thanks to the golden standard that Torna set as an expansion to Xenoblade 2, brilliantly recontextualizing its gameplay and story, except for the fact that blades received that name before ever appearing with weapons. Had to get it out of my system. Whatever. Torna is the womb of the base game, the umbilical cord of which can be followed all the way into the psyche of its characters, giving birth to the motivations which will come to define them into Episode 5. It does a masterful job as Xenoblade 2's Episode 4, and is fundamental to the player's appreciation of the game for the better. And for worse, its integration or lack thereof helps as much as it hurts. On one hand, the emotional gravitas it amasses when the player is all too aware of its bitter outcome is worth its weight in gold. On the other hand, an interspersed implementation would have elucidated the roots of some of its characters, Laura first and foremost. She doesn't receive as much love and attention from the base game as she deserves. making her moment of eternity less moving in the eyes of the player. This in turn weakens our predisposition to buy into Jin's equal parts distorted and heartbreaking motifs, although the Paragon of Torna escapes the base game unmuddied overall, thanks in no small measure to the flashbacks intertwined all throughout. From Jin's late partner to his current one, Malus stands to benefit substantially from his characterization in Torna, making a deep character enshrouded in subtext much easier to comprehend. The third of the game's main antagonists, Amalthus, would also enjoy Malus's unmasking and the reflection of his driver's soul he represents. I have already posited that Addam is riddled with issues, but those are predominantly base game related. Mythra, and by that same token Pyra, are only obscured to a lesser degree. In short, this all engenders a complicated dilemma. The expansion works in its current state, yet there's clear room for improvement. Wedging it in the base game seems like a tall order, but it'd be way too easy to leave it untouched. All we know is that the initial draft for the story had a scaled down version of Torna's events taking place at some point between chapters 7 and 8. These scenarios are at odds with each other, and so I guess I'll have to take on the role of front host to reach a compromise between them. I'm saving that for the last section of the video, when all's been said and done. Have to keep you hyped up for something. Until then, stand with me one more time as I call to mind another vision, one which doesn't involve Addam at all. Alongside Rex, Pyra and Mythra are arguably the ultimate Xeno characters, being the Omega to Phase and Ellis Alpha, a microcosm of Xenoblade 2 as part of the Xeno series. It's Rex's acceptance of their whole being and the love they foster for each other and for the world that lights Pyra's and Mythra's path towards their self-realization as Pneuma. I'm of course referring to the Aion Hangar vision. Now, the vision itself is already as glorious as it gets. It would be redundant of me to change that which brings change to the world of Alrest. Nevertheless, I've dreamt up a series of alternate events leading up to that moment. For the record, I wholeheartedly approve of the current chain of events. I'm merely throwing my ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks. For those who didn't subscribe to the earring plot point I concocted, the end of the world cutscene could take place right after Rex's reaffirmation of love and statement of purpose. Moreover, the cutscene could show the conduit's reactivation, panning over the Trinity processor room to Aion Hangar where the vision takes place. Now then, for the contact which ignites the divine spark. Bearing in mind that Malus had stolen the girl's memories, Rex could pounce on his restored core crystal to break into the dream with Pyra and Mythra. These memories would then be redirected to Pneuma's awakened core through the rekindled conduit. That being so, how on Alrest would Rex get his hands on Malus while under Jin's absolute zero? Even though I'm no Endbringer, I'd welcome some enlightenment myself, because that's outside my grasp. I suppose the boy could resort to Vandham's Haze in the hole, impaling himself with a catalyst scimitar to keep himself alive, but that's bound to sow unnecessary confusion on a thematic level, and lose some punch as a result. Doubling down on the baffling conceits, Pyra and Mythra should steer together their trust levels if their Pneuma form is indeed coffee with milk. Having it locked to E is oxymoronic to say the least. Furthermore, given the combined effects of both their Aux Cores. Pneuma's in-battle driver effects already reflect her protective prowess, but she should be a real piece of work on the counterattack as well. I don't know what remarks to make on the toughest choice in the game, other than how significant it is that Rex be the one who grants her a name in her fully realized existence. The kid has good taste. Rule 8 of the Salvager Code. A Salvager so great, they call me divine, and now with Rule 8, the code is all mine. For real though, it'd be cool if Mochichi kept a memo pad with the whole Salvager code written down for he who reaches the max Salvager rank. It's not like we need to know what the 5th rule is, but I'm still curious about it. If worst comes to worst, Amalthus himself could recite it in one of his flashbacks in Torna. Again, that's purely my curiosity speaking against my better judgment, and I'm not going to let it kill the cat. On the topic of cats and being brushed off by Mythra, how come only Pyra gets combined level 4 specials with Nia? I know these don't come into play until the very late game and are a novelty more than anything, but I need them and I need them now. While strolling through Morytha, you likely took notice that the signs on the streets belong to North American highways. However, this can't possibly be the case, or at the very least it's incompatible with Mui Mui's claims on the Siren Kids box. I'd be willing to look past that, but there might be an explanation to it. The World Tree, or as we'll come to know it, First Low Orbit Station Radamanthus, couldn't have been built on a USA territory if the orbital ring was to be built aligned with the equator. That is, unless Morytha or the root of the beanstalk had drifted toward the other in the millennia since the experiment went awry. Local matter shifts are no laughing matter. At the end of the road, tangled in the roots of the World Tree, lies the decaying corpse of Torna. All that's left of it are the remains of its womb, Azurda's birthplace. His cradle would be withered by now. They call him Gramps for a reason. It has been quite a while since I last mentioned him, but now that we are on his motherland and Pyra and Mythra can seize Pneuma's power, they could regenerate his wings, or restore him to his adult form if you would rather have Gramps stay in his larval state throughout the adventure. A fully fledged Azurda could open up flight routes from and to the World Tree, putting into context the otherwise impossible skip travel to other titans during the final stretch of the adventure. He could roost at the 7th perimeter skyport from chapter 9 on. One might argue that doing side quests is all but guaranteed to break the frenetic pacing of these last couple chapters, and I'd be inclined to agree. Even so, there is one side quest which is absolutely worth the trouble. A side quest which, in my opinion, should have been mandatory in the first place. Inspired by the technology in Morytha and by the World Tree's crown jewel, Torna could have a eureka moment. Saving the world can wait, Rex. It's time for powered up Poppi. Ideally, the player would have collected most of the necessary materials over the course of the game. Lower the forestry requirement to level 3 with the aim that Nia alone meets it, although Vess should also be a readily accessible blade with whom to take that box. Or, even better, that field skill could be replaced by a focus lesson. You know, from the Aegis girls Poppi's new form it is modelled after. With the full light of Judgment Day, a new heart-to-heart should be unlocked in Torna's house or somewhere on the World Tree. A parenthesis. I'm sick and tired of all the problematic bullshit talking points, so I hope this gets all the people who can't tell fiction from reality and would rather look for non-existent faults than open their eyes to what's staring them in the face to finally pay attention to the game. The whole point of fiction is that it doesn't need to abide by the laws of reality. It can't make your dreams a reality, but you can't be stopped from dreaming. Look, I'm all for critical analysis as long as it's done in good faith. That's what Rule 6 of the Salvager Code is all about. But I wouldn't call inventing reasons why the game should bend over backwards to accommodate for narrow-minded standards good faith. Stop poisoning yourself with unwarranted viperous prejudice and be true to yourself. Come back to Earth. Sorry for the rant, I'm not here for moral grandstanding, just rising up to the daunting challenge of convincing self-deluded people who try to make everything fit into their box and whine when it doesn't, to get off it for a second and consider we're talking about a work of fiction and that partaking in meaningful dialogue calls for a level of respect to all participants as human beings, including themselves. Phew. This would be the heart-to-heart in which Torna would finally and properly bring closure to his way of looking at Poppi. Bridget and Pyra would participate in it, of course, and perhaps even Tataso could be there. It would be a lengthy conversation, going in depth into Poppi's maturing designs, functionalities, and personalities. The growing up heart-to-heart already accomplishes that to some degree, but it leaves most of it on the table. Poppi transforms out of thin air when switching forms in combat, which is fine with me, but the fact that she doesn't appear in her latest upgraded form is a bit more fishy. Speaking of switching blades, the game would do good to incentivize it later in its progression when blades can already manage on their own. I'd advocate for a temporary recharge boost on blade switch for a change. Back to the heart-to-heart, all I want is for Torna to speak his mind and to make things clear about his possible ulterior motives behind Poppi's traits, if there happen to be any besides taking inspiration from his elders. I don't know, maybe we could even get to know something about Torna's Mamapon and Grannypon. Although that's not as likely as it just being a preference for Robobabes. Nothing wrong with that, can't blame him either. At the end of the day, even if Bridget scolds him for his fetishistic antics, all that matters is that Torna professes his love and respect for Poppi as his family's magnum opus, but, most importantly, as the artificial blade who made him a driver and with whom he forged a special bond. Their story is that of a Nopon and an artificial blade who blossomed together. For that very reason, it irks me how Poppi's flowering as a character throughout the story is at best vaguely connected to her separate forms, when they supposedly represent her psychological maturity through her physique. She stays in her original form from the moment she's set in motion to the very end of the game, save for a couple occasions in which she takes on her second form, but never the third. That's the reason why I want Powered Up Poppi to be a mandatory quest. I don't want to see her growth artificially stunted and relegated to off-the-beaten-path banter. Those are the offshoots of continuing up the world tree right away. In my opinion, Poppi's development is too high a price to pay. Not only that, but this heart-to-heart and Poppi's exteriorized ripening could serve to further strengthen Tora's friendship with Rex as the guy who looks up to, as well as the parallels between Poppi Cutie Pie and the Pneuma girls. These would be a great source of pride for the furball, but you'd be mistaken if you thought he would resign to playing second fiddle. Aim for the top. Poppi Buster. There is one thing completely unforgivable about Tora's tendencies towards women. How do you build one of the most jaw-dropping robo-girls out there and go and wear a t-shirt with Pyra's face in it instead of hers? I can't wrap my head around it. In the event that they wanted the current jokes to stick around, the face on Best Girl Fans Tora costume should be that of Pyra or Mythra, depending on the decision, the one made by Rex at the beginning of Chapter 8. It's more worthy of the capitalization than whatever happened at the first low-orbit station, let me tell you. Rex and the crew still have their ways to go before they reach Elysium. A certain Smurf Pope wants to take matters into his own hands, and by matters I mean Pneuma. After some revelations about Amalthus's blade-eating nature and the Titans' rampage, Mikhail comes to save the day. And good architect does it come with a vengeance, at the helm of the repaired Marsanes. Wait, the what now? We barely hear of the Marsanes a couple times prior to this moment. The player is never let in on how Torna, the organization, got their hands on a Tornan warship, when current day and the technological boom of the fallen Torna are half a century apart, and it wasn't a nation to stick its nose into war stuff in the first place, and we definitely didn't see any Tornan warships transforming into gigantic mechas. I would have liked to see Mikhail and Cressitus working on it before the latter met his hand. Not like that would solve all of my previous gripes, but it'd be better than nothing. On another front, Torna Mikhail was a withdrawn kid, which doesn't help our case. He could have exhibited an incipient liking for technology back when the Torna party enjoyed the streets of the royal capital Oresco. The artifices he saw then and there would have made an impression on him, that's for sure. There's something else which Mick is skilled at which could be the penultimate missing piece of this puzzle: salvaging. Instead of a Torna battleship, the Marsanes could have been an artifice all along, one which Mikhail salvaged at Morytha. I wouldn't be against the Marsanes and the Monoceros being the same ship either, the convertible technology of which they didn't understand until they made it to Morytha and the World Tree. The Marsanes hit hard, but Mikhail's last whisper hit harder. As for the other two members of Torna's second unit, their final hour is also around the corner. I already rambled about Patroka way back when. It's time to do likewise with Akhos. Thankfully, he's already a decently fleshed out character. Plus, he's poised to become a full-blown character with the extra screen time I want to allocate to his sister and driver. For that reason, there's only one substantial change I'd want to make to his character arc, and that's to his final gambit. For a start, Amalthus's tendril could have fatally wounded Patroka instead of killing her outright. This would be enough to make Akhos' blood boil, but he's a cunning guy who has learned a thing or three along the way. He was present when Vandham pulled off his secret technique, and he would mimic the late mercenary by stabbing Patroka's Cobra Bardiche through his chest. I know this is like the third time I'm pulling off that stunt, but not all of the other instances I've laid out are indispensable, whereas I'm convinced it would work wonders here. It would tie up a lot of loose ends, from Vandham's masterclass on morality to Akhos' and Patroka's newly introduced discrepancies about dramaturgy and their nature as sibling flesh-eaters. Of course, their core crystals would end up ripped off their chests all the same. Were we not, for Jin will close that third eye. Ready for two of the greatest plot twists in the Xeno series back to back? I ought to make a top 10 Xeno series plot twists video one day. Number 1. In the most epic cutscene a Xenoblade fan could ask for, it is revealed to the player that Alrest is, in reality, Lost Jerusalem, which is to say, we've been on planet Earth all along. You might be asking yourself how on Elysium could anyone improve on this. You see, the Xeno series is no stranger to presenting earth-shattering flashbacks in diegetic ways. Instead of taking the elevator up to Rhadamanthus, let's take it down to Seboim. The player becomes privy to the downfall of that civilization through a series of sepia recordings. I'm thinking of something along the same lines for this cutscene, but more involved. And that involvement on the part of the player would amount to salvaging, buying, and digging up a series of black boxes with audio recordings of the decision. These would be distributed throughout the game so as to intrigue the player without spilling some of the beans until Chapter 8. It would make sense for most of these to be located in Morytha, after all. We want players missing as few of these as possible too, and thankfully the ones which are most likely to be passed over, if any, would be the most inconsequential ones from earlier Titans. Once at the first low-orbit station, the party could play the holographic content inside the black boxes by connecting them to one of the video terminals. The last of these black boxes, including the dispute between Klaus and Galea, would be sitting right there on the video terminal. That way, there will be a snowball's chance in Mor Ardain of the player overlooking it. To make it stick out even more, the room with the video terminal could be the only one with a working electronic display, flashing the timeless "You shall be as gods." The gates to Elysium wouldn't open until the player plays the cutscene and unearths the situation at hand. That is but the first of the Architect's trials. Number 2. Elysium is a desolate land, a god-forsaken place. I think that's enough. That's what Pyra tells the Architect when she sees Rex having a meltdown over the unreal scene before him. Rex passed that excruciating final trial, a poignant one to say the least. I'd like to make a couple changes to the staged fights preceding Azurda's innermost musings. Rex's only available weapon for the fight against Nia should be his original junk sword. After turning tail, and before finding himself in Alva Cavendish, perhaps Rex could be transported to Old Valantia, or to Vandham's grave in Olithro's playhouse, where he would be met by Rog, ditching his junk sword for the bird's dual scythes. I'm not sure how much water adding Vandham to these scenes would hold, since, he's dead. So this is the next best thing I could think of. Next up, Torna and Zeke should be separate fights. I'm a big fan of the Cleaves of Morytha setting, but things would add up much more fittingly if Zeke's fight went down in Tantal and Taurus in Morytha. That would thereby displace Morak's fight to Temperantia, which I also prefer for her, even if Morytha suited her speech just as well. As for Azurda, well, I'll leave that up to your imagination. He could probably fit in the elevator. After Klaus's awe-inspiring exposition dump, the party's urgency to stop Malos should be firing on all cylinders. To prevent minor concerns from occupying the player's mind, an Artifice Colossus could be shown destroying the elevator to first low-orbit station, blocking skip travel to Alrest from there on out. In fact, this incident could have occurred when the party made it to Rhadamanthus portal, blocking skip travel from the second the party sets foot on Megares elevator number 1. Any of the two would do. Funny side note, when Rex asks Pyra and Mythra where Malos is, he says, "Tell us," which sounds awfully similar to "Tell us." The kid was onto something. Nowhere else left to go, nothing else left to do. Time to get these chronicles over with and confront Malos in Aion Hangar. Something that struck me right off the bat when I saw Artifice Aion was the fact that, despite its half-and-half Mythra's and Malos's Siren's appearance, the color of its quote-unquote core crystal is that of Pneuma. I don't understand that artistic decision. In my view, it should be golden like the Zohar, and perhaps take on Logos's purple once it's enraged. No matter what, Aion is eating an Infinity Blade to the face. The cutscene is every bit as terrific as one could hope, but it should have been Rex and Pneuma actually using her level 4 special during the second phase of this final boss fight that gave way to that cutscene. On account of this being the trigger for the end of the fight, Aion would resort to some unbreakable defensive or healing mechanism if the player tried to finish it by other means, all the while Malos would be taunting his counterparts with remarks such as, Show me what you humans are capable of. You'll need to give it your all if you want to prove me wrong. Or, show me what it's like to be alive, partner. Malos himself couldn't have possibly understood, but deep down, he did know. Time for Pyra and Mythra to make their decision, and for Rex to find it in himself to go along with it. A bright and warm emerald light shines through Aeon's core. Very end of eternity. The final day has come to an end. It's gone for good. I must stop before we all get teary-eyed. The Cloud Sea is also conveniently gone for good, for that matter, and we'll proceed without questioning why Trinity processor members can be in their instantiated form without their core crystals. Brushing those aside, I do have one last query. Xenoblade 2 has the most Episode 6 of all implied Episodes 6 across the Xeno series, seeing as it takes place in the very planet Earth, where it all began. So, what's going to happen to the Blade system now that the Conduit and Klaus have departed from this universe? What about the Blades who are awake as of the end of the game? The Blade system worked by relaying the relevant information to the members of the Trinity processor, which would in turn send back enhanced, updated data for the evolution of said blades, under the non-interventional observation of the architect. Even during the Conduit's untold period of inactivity, the Blade system was still operational. The last member of the Trinity processor that we know to be alive is Pneuma, split into Pyra and Mythra. In a sense, Pneuma epitomizes the Blade concepts of affinity and trust. Nonetheless, the loss of Logos, and its programming as a mutually complementary counterbalancing agent to Pneuma, could very possibly bring with it dire consequences for the proper functioning of the Blade system. This could also mess with the aptitude necessary for Blade resonance, but if the titular meeting of Chapter 10 is any indication, and with the Malthus' core crystal cleansing shenanigans out of commission, it should be on the rise. And thus, boy met girl. The game's over, and we are rewarded with the precious title screen, even more so after New Game Plus. Now, I'll ask you to spare me a moment, because there is one last thing I want you to know. The golden finale to this video. Don't tell me you've already forgotten about the organization of Torna I promised you a couple minutes ago. The main goal of this reshuffling of the expansions chapters is to intersperse them after those of the base game while avoiding spoiler territory as much as humanly possible. In all likelihood, my rearrangement will be far from seamless, as the story could use quite a bit of adaptation for this purpose, but here goes nothing. After Chapter 2, first combat encounter in Lasseria Woodland. Skip the introductory cutscene, we'll save it for later. After Chapter 3, from Mikhail joining the party to Addam's collapse after his and Mythra's spar against Laura and Jin. This time around, we will include the scene between Magister Baldrige and Praetor Radalis, since it's very non-descriptive of Malos. It works well for our purposes, unlike all the explicit mentions of Malos by the other characters up to that point. We will seek to remove those. After Chapter 4, play the rest of the cutscene with Addam's request for Laura, Jin and the freshly introduced Haze to aid him and Mythra, and I suppose Milton too, in stopping Malos. Yeah, we can call him by name now, we're close like that. Keep going until Gord's defeat in Torrigo's cemetery, skipping the cutscene in which Malos declares himself the Aegis and the following one featuring Amalthus and Stanif scheming. After Chapter 5. Now is when we make room for the opening cinematic of the sinking of Sia by Malos' hands, followed by the 2 cutscenes in Indul we've just skipped. These could totally count as spoilers, but sometimes one has to make concessions. My hand would have been forced sooner or later, that's just how it is. After that, show Gord bumping into Stanif, all the way until the latter suggests turning the former into a Blade Eater to Amalthus. In other words, from Hugo's news about Addam's militia to the campsite scene in Aletta. After Chapter 6. From the party's arrival at Hyber village up to Malos' taking of the Tornan Titan's seal. After the events of the Vault of Heroes in Chapter 7. From the audience with the Tornan King to plan out the fight against Malos in the soaring rostrum to the sinking of Torna, departure included. After Chapter 8. final fight against Gord turned Blade Eater, and end of Torna, the Golden Country. We are finally here. A video 5 years in the making, finished at last. I'm putting myself truly out there, once and for all. If you stayed all the way from the beginning to the end, I sincerely hope you got something out of this video. Should we in fact ever meet again, forgive my excessively long and messy responses to your comments. Just like my understanding, my answers are subject to change, so do take them with a grain of salt and not necessarily to heart. And we will in fact meet again. On that day, I will be releasing a much shorter video, one that hopefully doesn't take another 5 years for me to release. In all seriousness, I'm shooting for Christmas, but I can't make any promises. Please, do look forward to it. Now get ready for the most important thing this video has to offer. I prefer Mythra without the leggings, and Monolith Soft is afraid to give us Pyra's Smash redesign because the only Smash pun available is Project Plus Pyra. Don't tell them about Pure Power. Happy 5th anniversary!